Hey everybody, it's Wayne Roberts, the Grub Gang. Tonight's special treat is going to be a Etouffee smothered baked pork chop. So we got several components to put together, and then at the very end we'll draw it all together and show it how to serve it. So we're going to start by sauteing a few vegetables. We're going to start with the Cajun Trinity of onion, bell pepper, and celery. The general rule is 1 part celery, 1 part onion, 1 part bell pepper, and about a half of a part of celery. I just make it equal. I figure all parts of the Trinity are equal. So what we're going to do is we're going to put those into a skillet here, and we're going to saute them down. Once these have had a little bit of a chance to go along, we're going to have a little kind of add some garlic. We don't want to put it in too early because the garlic will have a tendency to burn. So we're going to let that all kind of start sauteing that. While that sautés, I want to talk to you a little bit about what this is all going to go on, because etouffee means smothered, and there's lots of ways that it can be presented. It might be add shrimp to it or crawfish to it to make it shrimp or crawfish etouffee. You could take it and put it over a breast of chicken. One of my favorite things to do is do like a chicken fried chicken, put it on top of a biscuit, and then just pour the etouffee sauce over the whole thing. Tonight, we're going to take our etouffee sauce and, as I said, put it over a baked pork chop. Let's talk a little bit about our pork chop. There is, I think that there is a collective agreement from chefs that a pork chop is best brined before it is cooked. It allows an opportunity for moisture to come into the pork chop as well as some flavor, and it almost guarantees a moist pork chop. Now, I know that Grandma or Mama always made pork chops, and of course, Mama and Grandma's cooking is always the best. At the same time, you've also got that piece of shoe leather that called itself a pork chop, and though you ate it, that's what gravy was for, is so that you could swallow it as well. And so what we've done is we're going to treat our pork chop a little bit ahead of time. 30 minutes to up to 4 hours ahead of time, we're going to put our pork chop in a brine. Here's how to produce the particular brine. Let me stir our vegetables over here real quick so that they get cooked evenly. What I've done here is I started out with about 1 cup of water and about 1 tablespoon of salt. And then I added 2 more tablespoons of salt that will represent the entire salt that's in this brine. The brine is then, we're going to melt that salt or let that all melt down in the water. And then I put a few ice cubes down in the bottom of my bowl, along with several varieties of peppercorns, a couple of bay leaves. You can put fresh herbs as well as some garlic in there. And then you want to put in that water that you've just boiled in on top of those ice cubes. Add 2 more cups of water. So for this particular recipe, I've got 3 cups of water, 3 tablespoons of salt. I've covered it, and I'm going to let it set in the refrigerator. One word of note, or perhaps even safety warning, is make sure that that water with the salt in it comes to room temperature before you put your pork chops in it. You don't want them to start cooking before they start cooling. So what we've done here is we've put this, I've got about a 1-inch pork chop here, so it's going to take a little bit longer, and I brined it for about 4 hours. But what we're going to do is we're going to take it out of the moisture, knock off some of those peppercorns. First thing we want to do is dry that. Let me get this brining liquid out of the way. So we want to do that. We want to go ahead and dry this pork chop off so that it will, in fact, take some oil and some sear when we get ready to do that. So just take a few minutes, or a few moments, and dry that all off. Get off any of those peppercorns that might there. You'll notice that this pork chop has the bone in it. I'm convinced that a pork chop is always better with a bone in, especially if you brine and roast in the oven, because the flavoring that's in that bone is going to produce flavoring inside your pork chop. So once we've dried that all off, we're going to take just a little bit of olive oil and spread that on either side. And then we're going to take and put a little bit of salt on each side. And a little bit of pepper on that as well. Again, this is a pretty thick piece of meat, and so you want to season it generously so that flavoring goes all the way through the meat. Okay, I'm going to set that aside again. Let's look at these vegetables. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we're going to prepare the pork chop. These vegetables are getting soft now. I don't want to get them too soft because I'm going to put them back inside of a sauce. And so I want a little bit of crunch still left on them. Now we're seeing that those have all starting to get a little bit translucent. You can kind of hear it all searing. The one last thing we need to do is we're going to add that garlic in there. I've got about, for this recipe, about 2 cloves of garlic. Just stir that in. You'll start smelling those fragrances. Like I said, you've got a hot pan here. You don't want that garlic to burn. So all we wanted it to do is kind of open up all of its flavoring that's inside of it and let it come on out. And that's going to pretty much do it for us and our vegetables. So let's move those all out of that pan. Some people start with the roux for this particular dish and then add the vegetables. I prefer to saute them. It does kind of take one extra step, and it certainly takes one extra bowl, but I'm really lucky because my camera gal also is my cleanup gal, and she'll clean up the extra bowl without any complaint whatsoever. Okay, so now we're going to take that pan again, and we're going to make a roux. A roux is going to be a thickening and a flavoring agent, and I'll just tell you right now, in Louisiana and down in the South, a roux is a big deal. They spend a lot of time and a lot of energy, and they're going to talk a lot about the kind of roux that you can make, because you can go everything from a pale or blonde roux all the way to a dark chocolate roux, and sometimes they take 45 minutes to an hour and a half to truly develop. We're going to do a little bit quicker with this, but the principles are still the same. One is you want to make sure that your roux does not burn. A burned roux doesn't work. You got to throw it out and start over again. Ideally, a cast iron skillet, maybe a Dutch oven, is a great way to make that, as it holds the heat and holds the heat very even. As I said tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to melt down some butter and an equal part of just all-purpose flour. That is the ratio for this, is 1 part butter, 1 part or equal parts of butter and flour. You'll notice the two are going to start all mixing together. If you find that the mixture, when it starts to heat up, is a little too thick, you can add a little bit of cooking oil. Especially since I'm using butter, it's especially susceptible to wanting to burn. And so I'm going to have to keep stirring it and kind of keep watching it to make sure that it doesn't do that. But what we're going to do is we're going to keep working with this for quite a while. We want it to get darker and darker. The darker it is, the more nutty the flavor is that's going to come out in our dish. But I'll also tell you that the darker it gets, the less the thickening power. And so we want to try to find that magic line between it being a dark, flavorful roux, but also having the thickening power so that when we're all said and done, we have sauce and not juice. So here's what we're going to do. Is I'm going to slide this over to another burner and let that roux continue to do its browning. And then let's talk a little bit again about the pork chop. What I've done is I preheated my oven to 400 degrees, and I've done that with a cast iron skillet in it. Now, since the cast iron skillet goes in the oven gets hot, and the cast iron skillet gets hot. So don't just open the door and grab the handle thinking, well, that's the handle. That part won't get hot. That's the part I grabbed. It will be just as hot. Unless you're wanting both seared hand and seared pork chop, you need to either use a side towel, a hand towel, or one of these little tricky things. So we're going to reach right in here, and we're going to have this ripping hot cast iron skillet. It might be smoking a little bit, and that's okay. But what we want to do here is we want to take our pork chop that we've already seasoned, we've already got ready to go, and we're going to drop it in this really hot pan. Press it down just a little bit so it gets good contact. And we're going to let it go about 3 minutes aside. We're, especially even on this, or even with this thick pork chop here, we're not looking to cook it. We just want to get some color, develop a little bit of the that spawn, that browning on there through what's called the Maillard principle. And that's going to help get that browning on the meat, and it gives us another level of flavor. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get this pork chop sear about 3 minutes on this side. We're going to flip it over and immediately put it into that 400-degree oven for about 6 to 10 minutes. The rule of thumb is that you want to bring your pork up to about 140, no more than 145 degrees. Any kind of trichinosis or any of those other nasty little things that are inside of pork, they all die at about 138 degrees. So with this big piece of meat in a 400-degree oven, we'll bring it up to 140, 145, and then when we take it out, we'll get what's called carryover heat, usually about another 5 degrees. We'll be well within the safety, and we still will have not ruined our particular pork chop. We'll talk a little bit more about what that pork chop will look like when it comes out. We'll put together our roux, add back in our sauteed vegetables, finish that sauce, show you how to plate this all up. We'll be back in just a little bit. Okay, we're back. It's time to check in on our pork chop. So like I said, remember, handles. You can hear it sizzling. We're going to check it. Let me say something quickly about thermometers. You always see these in chef's pockets. It's a probe thermometer. It's not going to do you much good for this kind of application. In fact, in this high-tech world, it's about time to put those away and get yourself one of these digital instant read thermometers. They're very inexpensive. If you want to go a little fancier, you can get the one that has a probe on it and a timer. But the truth is, you probably don't need all the gadgetry, just something that can give you a quick read of your meat. So we're going to put this in the deepest part of our pork chop. It is right at 144 degrees. That's exactly where we want it to be. We do want to take it out of that skillet because we don't want it to continue to cook, and the pork chop needs to rest, and here's why. All those juices have been all excited up inside of that pork chop. We want them to all calm down. Otherwise, when we cut that pork chop, they're all going to run for the hills. So lightly tint that just to keep some of the heat in there, and we're going to turn our attention now to our roux. Our roux now has come up. I've made this about a kind of a milk chocolate roux. As I said, you can go darker, but this works pretty well for this particular recipe, especially since we're going to add a lot of other flavors to it. So, to our roux, the next thing we want to do is we want to add all of those sauteed vegetables back in it. Let's do two purposes. One, we're going to bring those back up to temperature. Also, I kind of like to let each one of those things get cooled or coated in that roux before we add our liquid, because that's going to be the next thing that we're going to add here. You'll notice now, starting to sizzle. We're not wanting to cook anything now. Everything's already cooked. We're just going to get it to come together and to thicken up to make the sauce for our pork chop. So we'll let all that heat up for just a moment. We're going to add a couple of ingredients as that does it. One is we're going to add a little bit of Cajun seasoning. Now, my suggestion is that you test your Cajun seasoning before you put it in. And the reason why is there's all kinds of Cajun seasonings. Some are really spicy. Some are really salty. For example, this particular one, which I know that most of you have in the cabinet, it's really flavorful. It's also really salty. So if you try to make your dish hotter by adding more of this, you're going to find that it's going to make it too salty, especially as you concentrate. You also can add a little bit of Tabasco in this particular case. We'll put some Tabasco in there. And then we're going to put just a little bit of cayenne. Again, I don't want to make it too hot, but I do want it to have that Cajun flavor. So this looks like it's about ready. We bring it up to temperature or hot temperature before we add our liquid. And we're going to show how we can thicken this up. Notice that I'm going to use chicken stock here, and I'm going to put a little bit in, let it thicken up, see where it's at. Depending upon what you're going to do with the final product, I want this to be a little bit more like a sauce. But if you add, for example, shrimp to this, it's going to take that and thin it out a little bit. So you don't want it to get too thin before you know what you're going to do. I want this to be a good sauce here. So what we're going to do is see how it's already thickening up. That's that roux in it. We're going to add a little bit more of our chicken stock. We'll bring that all together. It's going to thicken as it heats, so when we put cold chicken stock in there, you're going to find that it's going to thin out again and take just a little bit. I keep kind of moving everything around. Now we want all those vegetables to release their all their flavoring that's been kind of wrapped all around them to make our sauce. Turn that down just a little bit and let it simmer, and we're going to add a couple more ingredients. I like to add just a little bit of tomato sauce to mine. Some people even put in tomatoes if that's what you want to do. A little bit of salt. Go careful because we've salted our pork chop, and as this dish concentrates, it will get saltier. A little bit of black pepper to complement those other flavors. Let's see where we're at here as far as our thickness. It's always going to be thicker on the plate than it is on the stove. So the rule is, make it just a little thinner than you would like it to be when you actually serve it. All right. That's looking pretty good. We're going to grab a quick spoon here. We'll do a quick taste test. See if that's about where we'd like it to be. That's pretty good. I'm sorry you don't have a taste of it. Okay, got a little bit of heat there. Again, as this concentrates or cooks down, it's going to concentrate, and so all the flavors, whether it's salty, peppery, spicy, those are all going to get a little bit more intense. Okay, time for us to serve the dish. Here's how I would propose serving it for this particular application, and that is for this particular pork chop. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take that pork chop that's been resting over there for 4 or 5 minutes. All those juices are all cut up inside. And now we're just going to take and ladle this particular etouffee right over the top of that pork chop. Just about like that. Now, I always think it's good to have just a little bit extra on there, and I'll tell you why in just a little bit. Okay, we'll maybe garnish that with just a little bit more Cajun seasoning. I've got right here a few green onions, scallions. We'll put those on top. And then I've got right here from a failed corn dog experiment earlier in the week, I've made these little corn muffins. We'll serve one of those alongside of it. That gives you something to sop that all up. You could use some French bread if you'd like, maybe some hush puppies. I'll just tell you, it's probably good enough just a plain piece of white sliced bread would do the trick as well. I'm gonna grab a knife. Let me just show you what this pork chop looks like inside. Show you what we're gonna deal with here. We're gonna put that right over there. Then our pork chop is right here. Like I said, this is a nice thick pork chop. Oh, that's cooked just right. If you see just a little bit of pink there, don't be worried about that. You've already checked the temperature and you know exactly that it has been cooked all the way through. And the truth is, my camera person is not going to hold this camera much longer with this big hunk of pork chop here. So we're going to be done for tonight. I'll put the recipe with its all the different ingredients and the proportions for those in the comments down below a little bit later. I hope you enjoy. Until next time, see you later.